Hi everyone, my name is Jen. I'm an author and a book reviewer. In my time, I have judged a fair few prizes, including the Costa Book Awards, the Forward Prizes for Poetry and the Somerset Maugham Award. I've also worked with other prizes, shadow read, longlist, shortlists, interviewed authors and all of that stuff. And some years, some prizes really call to me, and some years, some prizes do not. There is something in the waters this year which has meant I have been really attracted to prizes, and so far I have read and reviewed all of the Barbellion Prize longlist, most of the Women's Prize longlist and all of the Women's Prize shortlist, half of the International Booker Prize and most of the Jalak Prize. This week the Booker Prize longlist was announced, and you know that TikTok, Instagram reel voiceover that says, don't do it, I'm not gonna do it, I'm just thinking about it, don't do it, I'm just thinking about it, I'm not gonna do it. Well, I did it. For better or for worse, I am going to be reading most of the Booker Prize longlist in this video. Every year there are 12 or 13 books longlisted, also known as the Booker Dozen. This year there are 13 and 8 of them have spoken to me. There are 2 others that I was tempted to pick up, but one of them is currently out of print and the other is not published until next week. In Booker terms, that's actually quite good going because the category for submission is books published between September and September, and we're only in July, so occasionally there will be books that aren't scheduled for publication for 8 weeks, and that's frustrating for readers. But this year, that hasn't happened. So let me talk to you about the books that I have decided to pick up. There was only one book that I already owned when the long list was announced. There were several books I'd heard of and been intrigued by, some I hadn't heard of at all. I'm gonna get to as many as I can in this video. If you're new to my channel, this will be a reading vlog where I take you along over the next week and a half, reading, talking to you about my thoughts, also sharing recipes and things that I'm cooking and walks that I am going on. Grab a cup of tea, please do join me. Age-wise, we have some interesting submissions this year. We have the youngest ever Booker longlister and also the oldest Booker longlister as well. I'm going to briefly hold up the 8 books. One is still in the post on the way to me, and then I'll tell you why I haven't picked up the other ones at least yet. So the one that I had already is one I was surprised to see longlisted because I thought it would be too short, but I did remember that Max Porter's Grief is a Thing with Feathers had been shortlisted or longlisted a few years ago, and that one is also very short. So this is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. I love Claire's short stories. I fell in love with her collection Antarctica whenever that was published. I think it was about a decade ago, and I've heard nothing but good things about this one. I'm not going to talk about plot here because I'm going to be talking about plot in the video as I get to each one. This is Case Study by Graeme, Macrae, Burnet. This is a satirical crime book, I believe. We've got After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. This is about Virginia Woolf and other writers. It is sapphic, as the title would suggest. And this one is published by Galley Beggar Press, so it's a really good year for indies this year. Next we have Alan Garner's Treacle Walker. Now Alan is the oldest person to ever be longlisted for the Booker. I think he's 88 years old, and I'll be honest, I wasn't aware that he was still writing books. I used to work in an antiquarian bookshop, and we would sell, as well as really, really old, like Victorian and pre-Victorian books, we also sold vintage children's books, and we would sell lots of copies of old Puffin editions, I think it was, of his book, The Owl Service, which was super popular several decades ago. But this is his new book, and I believe it's his first book for adults, which is really exciting. It's fable-like, which definitely is right up my street. Then we've got Maps of Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer. This is one that I had my eye on. It follows one woman's life, and I believe that part of it is narrated by cancer within her body, which is intriguing. Then we have The Youngest Person to Ever Be Longlisted for the Booker Prize. This is Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. This is about a 17-year-old girl who's picked up on the streets one night by 2 police officers who offer her a really dodgy deal in return for her freedom, and this gets her a lot of media attention. Finally, the last one I have a copy of is Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo, who's the author of We Need New Names. That came out quite a long time ago and was also, I think, shortlisted for the Booker Prize. This is only her second novel, and this is inspired by Animal Farm. by George Orwell. The book that I don't have in my hands yet and is on its way to me is The Colony by Audrey Magee, which is an Irish novel and was blurbed by Sarah Moss. So yeah, that one is on its way to me. And then the ones that I decided not to pick up or couldn't pick up right now were Trust by Hernan Diaz, which is about a wealthy couple in the 1920s, and it just didn't immediately call to me. The Trees by Percival Everett, I've actually read his poetry before, which was a collection called Swimming, Swimmers, Swimming, and did enjoy that, but this is the book that is currently out of print, being reprinted. Isn't going to be available for a few weeks, so I would like to read this one at some point, but I can't read it right now. Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. She is the author of We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves, and that's a book that I didn't enjoy. I just found it quite gimmicky, and it really relied on the twist within it, which I also thought was a bit obvious. I'm just not that excited to pick up other work by her, having not loved her first book. And then the book that isn't published yet is 7 Moons of Maali, Almeida, which has the most beautiful cover. This is by Shehan Karunatilaka, and this is about Sri Lankan history and about a man who's been murdered and has to work out in the afterlife who killed him, and he has 7 moons to solve this mystery. This one seems really intriguing. It's not out till next week though, so I may pick it up in the future. Just editing me for a second because I realised I forgot to mention Elizabeth Strout. I have read her work before and haven't loved it, so I haven't picked it up for this vlog, but spoiler, I do end up picking up the 7 Moons of Maali, Almeida when it comes out. So yeah, that's it. Anyway, back to past me. It has been a fair few years since I followed the Booker Prize this closely. The last time was in 2015, hands up if you remember that, because that was on here as well. I read most of the Longlist that year. It was the year that Marlon James won with a brief history of 7 killings, and vlogged at the prize ceremony and talked on the BBC with James Daunt about all of the authors and the books. So it has been a while. Let us see how I get on with these titles, and I will report back with my thoughts as I have some to share. Please do join me. As I said, grab a cup of tea. I have a feeling this video is going to be quite a long one. Let's insert some footage here of me doing today's Wordle with dramatic music for effect. Good morning. The postman has just delivered a book, so I thought I would show it to you. It is not a Booker long-listed book, but it is my niece's 6th birthday next week, and me being me, I have, of course, gifted many a book to my niece and nephew over the years. If you've seen the dedication in my Franklin and Luna books, those are to my niece and nephew. And I thought this year I would get her one of those books where you can insert people's names. Sometimes I find those a bit tacky, and some of them are just not very good. So I did my research and I found this company, and I'm really, really happy with the results. So let me show it to you. So it's called Where Are You? Phoebe and Ollie, because that's their names. This is them here, and you can customize how they look like a me on the Wii. And the subheading is Save the Multiverse. You can't decide what they're wearing, but you can change everything else. And inside it's a little bit like Where's Wally / Where's Waldo. So a squid delivers a task to them saying that the multiverse is in danger and they have to go on a series of quests as different, not magical creatures, but as different superheroes. So here we go. We've got rock and roll legend Little Phoebe and missing fruit detective agent Ollie, and they have to go into these different universes and they have to find things within those universes. So here is one of them. This is a fruit universe which has so many different things in, and individually they've been given tasks to find things and solve problems, but then they're also encouraged to do certain tasks together, which should mean they can enjoy the book separately if they want to, and also should mean it should avoid, hopefully, arguments. And then at the end, after they've been through all 5 multiverses, there is also extra tasks that they can do if they would like to do it. And I just think it's really cool. So I will link it down below if you've been looking for something similar. What else has happened since I last spoke to you so long ago yesterday? I was sent some sample images for a book of mine that's coming out next year. I have 2 books coming out next year. One for kids and one for grown-ups. And the one that's coming out for kids is going to be illustrated by Valentina Toro. And I'm so excited by that because Valentina and I have been wanting to work together for ages. She's a fantastic illustrator and we both have upper limb differences. And we've been trying to work out a project that will be good for us to work on together. And I'm so thrilled that she's illustrating this one. So I saw her first illustration for the main characters of that yesterday, and that was just really lovely. And I will share that when I can. At the moment, I'm just sharing my joy at seeing that particular illustration. Anyway, I have started reading one of the Book of Books and I am in love. So I started with Case Study by Graeme, Macrae, Burnet. I'm about a third of the way through and I really hope that I end up enjoying the whole thing as much as I have enjoyed the beginning. After the first couple of pages, I could sense that this is riffing off Poor Things by Alistair Gray. I will insert that cover here. This is one of my favourite books of all time, and you may have read it just in general, but you also may have read it because I did a read along of it about 5 years ago, and I know that lots of us read it together and really, really enjoyed it. Poor Things is a social satire. It's about medicine in the 1800s. It's about proto-feminism. It is playing on Beauty and the Beast and Frankenstein and also Jane Eyre, and it is just a really fun time. It also presents itself as factual information within a book. So the author Alistair Gray pretends he has been given some material from a character called Archie McCandless, who in turn then presents material that's been given to him by somebody else. It even includes fake reviews from newspapers, and it also plays around with lots of gothic themes in books. This does a very similar thing. So it presents itself as a book made out of documents that has been given to the author by someone called a Mr. Gray, like Alistair Gray, and he is presenting documents written by a woman as well as research she's done on a psychotherapist called Collins Braithwaite, who is very reminiscent of Godwin Baxter in Poor Things. So I appreciated that right away. It also plays around with lots of gothic themes and it is very, very funny. So this is about a woman whose sister has recently died by suicide, and she believes that Collins Braithwaite, who is a psychotherapist who isn't hugely respected, is responsible for her death because Veronica was going to see him. So she decides that she is going to present herself to Collins Braithwaite as a patient and try and find out what kind of things he says within the sessions. That's what she tells us. But I feel as a reader that that's not really why she's going to see him. She is really obsessed with the way people perceive her. She's unnamed in this book, at least so far, and she doesn't want people to think that she's a bad person, and she's worked really hard to make sure that people don't think that she is a bad person. So I think secretly she wants to go and see Braithwaite to try and find out what her sister Veronica said about her in these sessions, but she's never going to find that out because she's not revealing who she is. So it's kind of doomed to fail. There's also a great bit where she's talking about how she used to journal as a child and she would make stuff up in the journal. And so we get a hint that maybe she's making stuff up when she's writing this down now. And a funny thing about this, another funny thing, is that she decides that if she's going to go as a patient to a psychotherapist, she needs to appear really disheveled. So she works really hard in trying to make herself appear not put together. The irony being that she definitely isn't put together anyway, just not in a way that is visible to herself. She clearly is someone who needs to talk about things. She clearly is very repressed. She has a lot of things that she needs to work through, don't we all? Therapy is great. And I can just imagine Collins Braithwaite being presented with her, this woman who is clearly pretending to be someone that she's not, and him sitting there working out why she is doing these things at all. So it's a novel all about trickery, performative nature. Our narrator has presented herself to Collins Braithwaite as a woman called Rebecca, after the infamous dead wife in Du Maurier's novel, because that character was unfathomable and everyone wanted to be like her. So that is who our narrator wants to embody. Part of me wonders in reading this whether our narrator is in fact her sister, and she has invented this new character for herself, reinvented herself, and has gone back to her therapist. I don't think that can actually work because she is supposed to be dead, but I am wondering that. That's where my brain is at the moment. Anyway, I'm loving it. It's making me giggle and it's making me think. So I will report back once I've finished it. Good morning. So I have finished reading Case Study. I didn't end up loving it as much as I was loving it at the beginning. It definitely petered out for me, shrunk as the novel went on, which was a shame. There are two distinct parts to this. We've got the notebooks, which are written by our unnamed narrator, writing about going to see Braithwaite and investigating her sister. And then we have this biography of Braithwaite spliced up and slotted in between those notebooks. And it was the history in particular that I found myself becoming quite bored of in places. It's full of redundant pieces of information and it really changes the pacing of the book, and I found myself not caring too much about those parts. And that's interesting in itself, because the fictional reason this book has been put together is because the author of it knows that it's more interesting with the notebooks in. He's been writing this biography of Braithwaite, and now this adds a certain element of excitement having these notebooks. So I suppose in that way it works. It's an interesting meta discussion on what is fiction, what is fact, how can we create different personas for ourselves? Are we acting all the time? How do we catch ourselves off guard if we are acting and don't realise it? So yes, it is fun in that respect, but I much prefer Poor Things by Alistair Gray. And as I said, I really much preferred the notebook sections. And if you were going to read a novel that was basically a discussion on fiction and performative self, then I would recommend Mrs. March by Virginia Vito, which does that, but in my opinion does it better. So because I've read books that I think explore these themes in a more successful way, this one ended up being a little bit of a letdown for me, but I can see why it has been longlisted for the prize, and I'm very glad to have read it. So I finished that, and then I read Treacle Walker by Alan Garner, and I feel like I need to whisper this, I really didn't like it. I feel really bad saying that because he's a bit of a legend. But no, I didn't like this, and I don't think that it would have been longlisted if Alan Garner hadn't written it. I feel this is a bit of a The Testaments situation. Prizes are not for honouring careers or writers, they're for honouring books, and for me this book just, I mean, I haven't read the rest of the long list, we'll see what I think of the long list, but it just doesn't stand up to me It's only 140 pages, and I nearly DNF'd it several times because I just found it to be rather all over the place. It again is a book that looks at the nature of fiction. It's about a boy who can see the gloaming, he can see magic, he can see folklore creatures and comics coming to life around him. There's one point where he walks through a mirror like in Alice in Wonderland, and it has the cuckoo folklore, which is in lots of different cultures around the world, and it was one of the stories that I retold in The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers, the Russian version of the fairy tale, where there are two versions of yourself, one of which has been created by magic. The dialogue in here I thought was really interesting, but ultimately feels like, to me, a lesser version of Lanny by Max Porter, which is just so brilliant. And no, this one, not for me. I'd be really interested to see how other people get on with this book. So moving on swiftly, I will get started on other books and come back to you when I have more things, and hopefully more positive things to say. Fingers crossed. I've just grabbed my phone because I've just started reading Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer, and I know I mentioned at the beginning that Cancer narrates part of this tale, and it does, but Cancer is the voice of Crow, Ted Hughes's Crow. I'm sold. I'm already 2 pages in and I am already so invested. This makes me very happy. Okay, so I should probably elaborate on what I was saying in the previous clip. I have now finished reading Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer, and I absolutely loved it. And I'm just looking in the viewfinder and realizing that I've accidentally cosplayed as the cover today. Never mind. So in this novel, we follow Leah as an adult. In the beginning, she's discovering that she has stage 4 cancer. She's had cancer in the past before, but at this point, it is now not curable. It is treatable in the sense that they can try and make her life more comfortable and hopefully extend her life for as long as possible. And we follow her through that process along with her daughter Iris and her husband Harry, but then we also hark back to her childhood and have a kind of mirroring of her teenage years with her daughter's teenage years, seeing how they combat very similar issues in very different ways, which was really lovely, and also a mirroring in her relationship with her daughter and then her relationship with her mother when she was younger as well. As I mentioned in the last clip, Cancer does narrate part of this book, and I said that it's narrated by Ted Hughes's Crow, or at least in the voice of Ted Hughes's Crow. It doesn't say that explicitly in this book, but I think if you have read his Crow poems, you will hear it. Let me give you an example. This is the very beginning of the book. I, itch of ink, think of thing, plucked open at her start, no bigger than a capillary, no wiser than a cantaloupe, and quite optimistic about what my life would come to look like. I have since ached along her edges, delighting in my bare feet floorboard creeps across from where she once would feed down to where her body bruised. I have sampled, splintered, leaked and chewed through tissue, nook, bone, crease and node, so much, so well, so tough. Now that the place feels like my own. Those passages in particular are really poetic, lots of half rhymes and run-on sentences, hyphenated word clusters, coinage, and it really makes sense that Crow would be narrating something like that. He is an egotistical, godlike, wannabe godlike creature who is bent on destruction, and it's very clear that this book has been in part inspired by Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. You can kind of think of it as like a prequel to Grief is a Thing with Feathers set in an alternate universe, but it's very much its own thing. as well, because in Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, that is after the death of the mother of that family, and then grief storms into their home in the form of Crow and speaks to the inhabitants of that household. In this book, the Cancer is talking to us as the reader, and what's really interesting is that throughout the book, the pieces that are about Leah and the pieces that are narrated by Cancer bleed into each other until at the end it's the Cancer that is doing all of the talking, because they have really become completely enmeshed. Obviously, this book is a very difficult book to read, and I would say do not pick this book up if you have recently lost someone to cancer, or not even recently. If this is a difficult topic for you, I think do yourself a favour and go and pick up a different book instead. But if you can read this book, then it is magnificent. If you've been here a while, you will know that intertextuality is one of my favourite things, including implied intertextuality. It's just a fun thing to play around with as a reader. I massively appreciate it, drawing lines here, there and everywhere between different scenes. So we have Ted Hughes's Crow in this book. We also have imagery relating to the Bible and Greek mythology, especially Pandora's box. That's quite a large motif in this book. Then we have imagery that expands on Ted Hughes's Crow relating to Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, and also Heathcliff and Cathy from Wuthering Heights, and the romanticization of toxic relationships, and one, how problematic that is, but for our main character Leah, how she used to do that when she was younger because it was a means of self-preservation. She used to be in a relationship with a man called Matthew, and it was not a great relationship for her, and she has lots of complicated feelings to do with that. That toxicity is then mirrored in her relationship that she now has with cancer and with chemotherapy, both of which are obviously toxic, but one of those is in a healing way, and that causes her to reflect upon things that she's maybe thought of as healing in the past and analyze whether or not that's true. Look at the spiky relationships that she has with people in her life as well and dissect that. Take everything back to its roots and see if it is something that needs to be nurtured. This is reflected in a lot of garden imagery, also relating to the Garden of Eden. She kind of sees herself as Lilith, dressed up as Eve. Her husband Harry is referred to as a gardener throughout, and whilst in the Bible it was Adam who gave names to things, in this book it's Leah who is really interested in etymology, dissecting words and trying to make the world make sense. This book is very aware of itself, so in one of the scenes, which is a funeral of another character, Cancer slinks onto the page. Really does move like this. It uses the geography of the page in a similar way to Grief and Lanny, and it whispers, everyone's trying to get hooked up on other people's devastation, acknowledging that everyone wants an IV drip into other people's trauma. And even Leah wanted that in the first scene of this book when she witnesses what she thinks is going to be a fatal car crash. It's not, everyone's fine. And in that moment of relief, she acknowledges that there's a tiny bit of disappointment because she thought she was witnessing something that was monumental, world-changing, but she had enough emotional distance from it for it to be something that became fodder for conversations and would make her an interesting person. So it acknowledges the really poisonous parts of ourselves, whilst also acknowledging that this novel is feeding us a version of that kind of narrative too, that is based on trauma and also performance, and that's reflected in the intertextuality, in the characters who keep on chopping and changing themselves, and also in a scene in the middle of the book where there is literally a play that is taking place. This is a novel all about the heart-achingly painful performance of life in all its many acts, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. I thought that it was brilliant. Okay, I'm gonna stop gushing now. Good morning. We've had the first DNF from this long list, which is a shame, and I hope it's going to be the only one, but we'll see. But you know, not every book is for everybody, and that's okay. And especially when I'm reading long listed books, even if I'm picking out the ones that appeal to me the most, it's inevitable that there are going to be some that I like a lot more than others. So this is Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this is her second book. She's already been shortlisted for the prize before for We Need New Names, which I think was shortlisted the year that Eleanor Catton won. It was a big hitter year because I think that Ruth Ozeki was also shortlisted that year as well. I can't remember who else was on the shortlist, but I think that it was some rather large names. So this is her second book, and it's an allegorical, fictional telling of Mugabe and Zimbabwe, and she's using animals to create this distance between the real life events and the reader, invoking Animal Farm. And I really appreciated all of that, but the tone of this book has a bit, I think, too much distance to me. It ends up reading very dry and it's just not my style at all. So I am gonna pass this one on to someone who will hopefully enjoy it more than me, and I'm really sad about it because I really hoped that this was a book I was going to love. So I'm going to move on to the next book. In happier news, I'm very excited because a filing cabinet arrived from my office. Let me turn you around so you can see it. This filing cabinet here, I'll do a cutaway so you can see it better instead of me just dragging the camera along the floor. I was really gutted because I bought a filing cabinet on Etsy, and less than half of the filing cabinet arrived. It's basically the doors, and none of the screws. Oh, this breeze is very nice through the window. None of the screws, none of the handles, just so much of it was missing. And the seller kept saying, oh no, we'll post the other parts to you, we'll post the other parts to you. And then they just stopped replying to my messages, and then they removed themselves from Etsy, and I have no idea what happened. But anyway, I got a refund, but now I have just some cabinet doors that I need to work out what to do with, because that just feels very wasteful. I'm going to think on that. But anyway, I bought this filing cabinet from Mustard Maid, and it was the last thing that I needed for my office, somewhere to put, you know, all my taxes and all that boring stuff. And I really, really love it. I'm now tempted to get other ones for other rooms. They do all different sizes, and I just think that they're really cool. Check out their Instagram because it's very pleasing how they colour coordinate everything. I did actually film some B-roll footage of us putting this together, but then I formatted my card and deleted that, so never mind, you just get to see the final product. Anyway, sad I didn't like this, but on to the next book. Not to throw more praise on the Maddie Mortimer book, but I've been editing clips as I go, and I realised there was something that I was going to say that I forgot to say, which is that when I was reading, especially the beginning of the book, I had a very clear thought that was, if Virginia Woolf was writing today, this would be what she'd be writing. So just another compliment for that book. Anyway, I'm glad to be losing myself in all of these books. I'm not getting much sleep at the moment, so they're keeping me company early in the morning. Work is a lot intense at the moment because I'm working on 4 different books right now. 4, as well as other editing work, but 4 of my own, which are occupying different parts of my brain. Anyway, I have now read Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, and you know, we can have a lot of fun with this title. This book is very small but is saying quite big things, and it's full of small moments that cause characters to have big revelations. It is a book about the Magdalene laundries in Ireland, which I don't think is a spoiler at all because it's in the dedication. I mean, it would be a spoiler if you didn't read that, but I feel like most people will see that going in and know from the beginning what this book is going to be about. This was the only book that I owned already. It came out just before Christmas last year. I would recommend, unless of course you are reading some of the book Longlist as well, which is understandable, I would recommend approaching this on the run up to Christmas if possible, because it's so atmospheric, and I think I would have loved it even more if it was the time of year that it was writing about. It's about a man called Bill Furlong who has a wife and 5 daughters, and he is delivering coal to everyone in his local village. It's hard times at the moment and some people can't afford to pay him. He's a very sympathetic character, and he is kind of this, I guess, Father Christmas character in the sense that he is delivering heating for people's houses. But of course, there is that image of if you're not a good person, instead of getting presents, you will receive coal for Christmas instead. I will say I think the imagery in this book is a little bit too on the nose for me. So we've got Furlong who is wondering who his dad is because he doesn't know. We've got the Magdalene laundries in the background that inch closer into the foreground. We have all this religious imagery and real life events where men were protected whilst women were exploited. And then we also have, as it's Christmas, religious imagery to do with Jesus and his parentage as well. It felt as though everything was tied up, but maybe a bit too neatly. I like things to be a little bit rougher around the edges. Given the dedication to the Magdalene laundries at the beginning as well, I did think the book was lacking a little bit of tension, though I suppose there is tension in knowing more or being more aware than the main character in a book. That can really drive a story or be a point of frustration. I felt as though it slowed things down a little bit for me. Whilst her writing is very precise, also very rich and moving, and I have enjoyed previous books by her in the past, it's going to fade away, I think, quite quickly for me. And if I was gonna make a guess, I don't think that this will make the shortlist. I'm very happy to have read it, but it's not gonna be in the top favourites from this year's list for me. Okay, so this book broke me. I was sobbing for the last quarter of this book, and I don't mean a delicate tear down my face, I mean properly sobbing. I just had to sit for a little while and kind of hug it to myself. This is Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley, and Leila is the youngest ever person to ever be longlisted for the Booker. I think she's in her early 20s and may have even been in her late teens when she was writing this book, which absolutely blows my mind. This is a novel about a teenager called Chiara who lives in an apartment with her older brother Marcus. Their mother isn't there anymore, and the reason that's the case is revealed slowly throughout the book. It really toys with the reader's expectations. There's a lot of ambivalent language to do with it at first, so you start to assume certain things, or it pushes you in a certain direction only to surprise you later by what actually has happened. Dee, her friend, lives close to her in this apartment block who has a son called Trevor, and Chiara ends up looking after Trevor, taking him to school, bringing him home, because Dee is either away a lot or is on drugs and is asleep. And a lot of this book is about parenting and mothering as a means of mothering yourself. Chiara thinks of herself at many points in this book as someone who is grown up for her years, and she has to be the person who's going to fix everything because nobody else will. And then there's this heartbreaking part in the novel where she admits to herself that she knows that she's just a child and this isn't the way that the world should be. And just remembering that passage is making me want to cry again. There's a lot of imagery to do with family in here, and at one point she's sitting with her brother and it says, "We settled into the patch of beige turned brown rug and Marcus whispered in my ear, 'I got you.'" It was like the light finally found its way to Marcus's mouth because he was speaking son into me. And if Mama wasn't going to be there no more, if Daddy was already no different than infertile dirt, then I needed my brother more than anything. So that homophone of son, and the different meanings, and light being family in an existence where you're mostly crawling through the night is really powerful. She turns to sex work because she thinks that that's the only way that she can help her family survive, and no one else is offering support to her. But she ends up being exploited. Definitely content warnings in here for sexual assault. And the police recruit her, telling her that she has to come to lots of gatherings that they're having, and if she doesn't come then they'll just arrest her. So she finds herself in this really difficult situation, and I don't think I want to say more about the plot than that because I think then we'll be getting into spoiler territory. This is a novel about race and poverty, police brutality, accountability, failing systems, ridiculous hypocritical bureaucracy. There's a section at the back where Leila Mottley wrote about why she wrote this novel in the first place, why there is a particular emphasis on women's black bodies and also queer black bodies. The queer representation in this is wonderful. The whole novel feels like a very articulate scream into the darkness. It is intense, it is brutal, and at the same time the prose is given the space to ooze outside of itself and take over the page, almost like it's building its own city. There were a couple of scene changes, I think especially at the beginning, that I thought were a little bit jarring, and a couple of places where I thought things could have been tightened a bit, but do I care about that? No, not really, because this book is incredible. I was gonna say I can't wait for what she writes next, but that seems very dismissive of this book, like I'm tossing it aside and being greedy. No, I will just happily inhale this book over and over again, even if she never writes anything else, that's fine. I'll just come back to this and admire it. There's such a kindness and a healing to it as well. Yeah, this book has left me with so many feelings that I need to process. Okay, all right, go out and purchase a copy, please. Thank you. I feel like this has been the background for most of the segments of this video, but never mind. It is a couple of days later and I have read 2 more books. The sun is also setting, so I'm sorry if the light is disappearing, but I read The Colony by Audrey Magee. I actually listened to this one on audio. It's narrated by Stephen Hogan, and I do want to recommend the audiobook. I think the audiobook actually meant I had a greater enjoyment than if I had read it because he performs it really, really well. I say that it's good, one, because he's very good at narrating the audiobook, but also this book is mostly dialogue and he gives a real great sense of the characters. He also does all of the accents because we've got Irishmen in here, we've got a French guy, and we also have an Englishman as well. I think he's really great at getting across the deadpan Irish humour / sarcasm. I really like that about the audiobook, but unfortunately I didn't love the book itself. This is about a man called Mr. Lloyd, who is an Englishman who goes to this Irish island. He wants to paint and draw things. He also wants it to be really authentic and proper. So when he goes across to the island, he refuses to travel on the boat that has all the luggage in. He wants to go on a smaller boat that the local islanders would use, even though it makes him really ill because he thinks it is the right thing to do to experience everything properly. He then runs into this French guy called Mr. Masson, who's been going to the island for the last 5 years to record, as he sees it, the dying Irish language. He's there to capture the Irish spirit too. He's there to write it down. He's there to save everybody. Likewise, Mr. Lloyd wants to elevate the islanders' way of living by depicting it in paint. He wants to crystallize it. He wants to immortalize it, but he also wants to give it finesse and purpose because he doesn't think that they really have purpose if other people aren't observing them. So these two foreigners are arguing over which form is better to encapsulate a people's way of being. And of course there's irony and meta-ness in that because all of those things are recorded in a novel, which is a different way of recording something. These two people are clashing and fighting over something that isn't even theirs. It's about colonialization. It's all about the ridiculousness too of arguing over something that could be seen to be similar. So for instance, they're arguing over different art forms or way of expressing themselves, and then between the chapters there is spliced up factual information about deaths regarding the Troubles and people, Protestants and Catholics, fighting against each other. I didn't think that the information that was put between the chapters was well integrated. I understand that it was supposed to be jarring and shocking, and also that the repetitive nature of it throughout the book meant it became less jarring and shocking because it just became a slew of names and figures that you would lose track of. So I understand why it was there, but I just didn't think that it particularly worked that well. I also found the book to be rather predictable, which on the one hand I think is the point. It's saying that this island is a reflection of a much bigger whole, that there is no climax because these are cyclical arguments. Humanity will keep on trying to destroy itself in various different guises. There's also a great emotional attachment between the reader and the characters for that reason, to show a numbness that we have all acquired when it comes to suffering and fighting, but that doesn't really work for me in a book. And I felt as though by maybe a third to the halfway point you could clearly see what this book was doing, and it didn't really take it any further. So I wasn't a huge fan of this book, but I did appreciate what it was setting out to do. And then I also read After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. This book is split up into fragments to reflect what we have of Sappho's work, which is a series of fragments. And the fragments of Sappho's work that is quoted in here is through Anne Carson's translations. You could argue that this book is a piece of creative nonfiction. In fact, I think that parts of this book were initially published in a journal that was specifically for speculative nonfiction. So in this we follow different women's lives in the 1800s and the 1900s, famous women and not so famous women who either use Sappho as influence on their own work, or this author has seen parts of Sappho's life reflected in their life and is piecing everything together like a jigsaw, and then she uses specific words between the pieces to link them all together. So for instance, in a part talking about Sappho, it says, "Thus we embarked, each in her own way, on the voyage out. And The Voyage Out is a novel by Virginia Woolf, and Virginia Woolf is also included in here. The parts that are specifically about Sappho are told in this wee voice, this chorus, which is reflecting classic literature. I was just looking up some extracts online and seeing what you think. I really like the individual sections. I was, which I think is understandable, more drawn to the sections about writers that I already knew. And in fact, it has encouraged me and reminded me that I need to pick up this, which is The Woman of the Wolf by Renee Vivian, which is a collection of queer French stories, which I've had sitting on my shelf for about 18 months. And this is one of the women in the book, so I would like to read that. I kind of bounce back and forth between thinking I would have preferred fewer women to have been referenced in the book and for it to have been shorter and stronger, and then also thinking maybe having that many women in it and that repetition of struggle through politics and art is what makes it loud and powerful. But like with The Colony, about a third to halfway through the book, I did think, okay, I get what you're doing now, and I feel as though it didn't really move hugely far from that as the novel progressed. I did like it, but I didn't love it. I have decided to pick up a 9th book though. The 7 Moons of Maali Almeida is now out and I have purchased a copy. I'm not going to be able to read all of it before I want this video to go up, but I am going to read hopefully about a fifth to a quarter of the book. So I'm going to do that, come back to you and talk to you about that and my first thoughts on that novel, and then I'm going to rank everything that I have read and we can recap and get my thoughts together. So I will see you in a bit. Welcome to the final clip of the vlog. So I've read the first 60 pages of The 7 Moons of Maali Almeida. Not really enough to tell you how much I'm going to love it, but if I was going to guess, I would say it's probably going to sit somewhere in the middle when it comes to enjoyment of all of the long listed books that I have read. I'm intrigued by it. I'm finding it slightly hard to follow in places, but I think that that is deliberate because the main character is disorientated. So Maali, our main character, has died. At first he thinks he's just dreaming, but he wakes up in a waiting room full of people that he kind of recognizes. It's a very tall building and he's told that the office he needs to get to is on the 42nd floor, which is a nice nod to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because in that the meaning of life is 42. But then he slowly realizes that no, he has died. He doesn't know how he died, and everyone around him are people that he's met at various different points in his life. When he was alive, he was a journalist photographer and he would take pictures of people in very traumatic circumstances, and it's now as though he is being confronted with the reality of the photos that he was taking with the people that he captured part of a story of, and now he gets to talk to them and find out more about them. He also wants to continue photographing them in the afterlife. It's almost like an infinity mirror of photography. It's quite strange. He's told that if he wants to find out how he died, he can travel around and talk to people, but he's only allowed to go where his corpse has gone. So for instance, if his body was taken from where he was killed to a hospital or to a morgue, he can travel along that path but nowhere else. And in order to do that, he can ride on the wind, which I think is a really lovely image. There's lots about Sri Lankan history in here. We find out about his family. He was a queer man and not many people knew that, so he's reflecting on his relationships with men as well. It's written in the second person, which I find really effective because it's like he's speaking either to his living self or his living self is speaking to his dead self. It's like he's having a conversation with himself, and I think that that that's really great. If I had to compare it to another book that I'd read before, I think I would compare it to Human Acts by Han Kang, both in tone and also in style, which is a book that I liked but I didn't love. So I'll see how I get on with this. I will finish reading it throughout the month and then I will talk about it in my end of month wrap up. But before I go, I thought we would have a quick recap. I've put all of the books in order of enjoyment and let me show that to you. Okay, so moving from the book that I like least to the one that I like the most, we have Treacle Walker by Alan Garner. And this might surprise you because the next one on the list is one that I DNF'd. But that particular book is about 500 pages and this one is just 100. And if this book had been 500 pages, I would have DNF'd it much earlier than the next one I'm going to show you. This one just wasn't for me at all. Glory by NoViolet Bulawayo is the next one on the list. I didn't really feel as though the animal imagery worked in this book. Like, on reflection, I was thinking about its link with Animal Farm, and Animal Farm makes so much sense because of the commentary, but in this book characters are animals, but nothing that they do actually fits in with the type of creature that they are. They're just talked about like they are humans, and that to me makes much less sense, and I think that was what was bugging me about the book when I was reading it. Then we have got The Colony by Audrey Magee. As I said, this one I was happy to have read it, but I felt as though it didn't move far enough from the beginning of the book and expand as much as I would like it to. Then we've got After Sappho by Selby, Wynn, Schwartz. I love this on a sentence by sentence level and individual passages, but overall I think I would have preferred it to have been shorter, perhaps. I don't know, but I did very much enjoy it. Then we have got Small Things Like These by Keegan, which, as I mentioned, I did enjoy reading, but I think will probably fade for me quite quickly. Then we have Case Study by Graeme, Macrae, Burnet, which I loved the beginning of and then it tapered off a bit towards the end, but I still had a lot of fun reading this book. And then my top two, very, very hard to separate these, but I think at number 2 we've got Nightcrawling by Leila Mottley. And then at number 1 we have Maps of Our Spectacular Bodies by Maddie Mortimer. And these ones are so brilliant and I would like everybody to go and read them, please. I would love to know which books on this year's long list you have read or are excited to read. Have any surprised you if you have picked them up? Let me know your thoughts in a comment down below. I'd be very much interested in hearing about that. If you're new to my channel and you've liked this video and would like to subscribe, that would be very nice. If you enjoy my content and would like to support me on Patreon, that's also very kind. Link to that is in the description box down below. Support over there means that I can continue making free content for everyone on here. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope you're all having a good start to the week and I will speak to you very soon. Sending lots of love. Bye.